Hey kids, Bob Murphy here with another Econ Moment. Today I want to talk about the President's recent proposals regarding gasoline prices. In a few speeches, President Obama has talked to the crowds about how gasoline prices are high and what's he going to do about it? Well, one of his suggestions is to end the so-called tax breaks on big oil companies, and that gets lots of applause. And he doesn't come out and say it necessarily, but the implication seems to be that if the federal government raises the amount of taxes it charges to big oil companies, that will somehow end up reducing gasoline prices that motorists pay. So, how can I put it? That is crazy. That doesn't make any sense at all. And that's what I want to try to get across in this short video today. Okay, first of all, I don't want to deal in this particular video with the issue of do oil companies right now receive favorable tax treatment from the federal government. Right, that's an important issue. There's a lot of subtleties involved, and I will come back to that in a future video, but for now, let's put that to the side. Clearly, whether you think the oil companies right now are paying their fair share or are paying way less than it or are paying too much in taxes, whatever your opinion is, clearly what the president has in mind is to make oil companies pay more in taxes than they are right now. So again, whether you think the absolute level is too high, too low, or just right, the president is proposing to raise the amount of taxes oil companies pay. So now the question is, therefore, will the federal government raising taxes on oil companies make gasoline prices that motorists pay go down? And I think the answer there is clearly no. So if we just take a conventional approach, the way an economist typically analyzes prices, what's going on here? The president is saying effectively he's going to raise the cost of production, the expenses of doing business for oil companies. So what can that do? If anything, that's going to make crude prices go higher, right? Because some oil companies will reduce their activities right now compared to what they're doing with the current tax code, because now their costs of production are higher. Right? So that means the supply curve, if you want to think in those terms, would shift left. So in the new equilibrium, crude oil prices would be higher, and so refiners now facing higher crude prices, what are they going to do? Well, we can walk through the chain of the argument, but clearly what's going to end up happening is there's going to be less refined gasoline available, and so motorists are going to have less gasoline available to them, and so in the new equilibrium, prices will be higher. It doesn't mean that the tax increase will be entirely passed along to the consumer, right? It depends on what's called the elasticity of the supply and demand, all right? But the point is, it can't possibly be the case that if the federal government makes it more expensive to be in an industry, that in the new equilibrium, prices are lower for the final consumers. That doesn't make any sense. Okay. Now, I think a lot of viewers are going to roll their eyes and say, you economists are so out of touch. All right, these giant oil companies are not in a competitive market. They have a lot of market power. They're in bed with the politicians and so forth. They call the shots behind the scenes. And basically, oil companies can charge whatever they want, right? Because motorists, it's not like it's a luxury. People need to buy gasoline to go to work, take their kid to school, what have you. And so they have a captive market there. People have to buy the product regardless of the price, and that's why the oil companies can stick it to the consumer. And here President Obama is just trying to stick up for us, and you got these bald economists coming along and trying to defend the oil companies. Okay. Even on your own terms, even if that's your worldview, what I'm suggesting is the theory makes no sense. Right? First of all, if you think oil companies can just charge whatever price they want and they're really greedy and can get away with it, well then how come oil was so much cheaper in the beginning of 2009? Right? Were the oil companies at that point just owned by a bunch of altruists, and then in the last 3 years there was a hostile takeover by a bunch of greedy capitalists? No, that doesn't make any sense. All right? So greed per se is not an explanation of market prices. It's sort of like if there's an airplane crash, and then people are coming on the scene trying to figure out what just happened, why did this crash occur, and someone says, oh, well, gravity. I mean, yes, that is involved in the explanation, but that doesn't explain why most flights don't crash, and this one did. And so by the same token, if you're trying to explain how could oil prices have gone from in the high 30s per barrel a few years ago to now being the heights they are now, over $100 a barrel, you're trying to explain that outcome, it doesn't make sense to say, oh, the oil companies were greedy, because presumably you think that they were greedy back then too. So that's a constant, and yes, you need to take that into account when you're trying to come up with an explanation of what makes market prices what they are. But to explain a huge increase over the last 3 years in oil prices, it doesn't make sense to just say, oh, it's because of greed. Okay, but now, again, let's come back to this idea. The idea that the oil companies have a lot of market power, they're greedy. We stipulate for the sake of argument that they don't care about the American people, and they're just going to do whatever they can to make as much money as possible. And so now in this context, the president is saying, I'm going to come along and take some of the money from these people, right, by raising their taxes. So my question, for those of you who support the president's proposal here, is why wouldn't the oil companies, if they have the power you say they do, why wouldn't they just recoup their loss by jacking up the price of gasoline even more? Right? Why would they lower the price of gasoline if now they have less money because the president took more of it from them? So it's sort of like you're back in grade school and there's a class bully. And all the regular kids are demoralized by it. Man, this guy gave me wedgies in gym class. He gave me a swirly in the bathroom last week. I can't stand this guy. He's a big bully. Someone should do something. And then one of your classmates says, come on, guys, I got a plan. What we're going to do is, next English class, he sits in the front, right? And they're like, yeah. He says, okay, we're going to sneak up behind him. We're going to go up to his earlobe and flick it. Yeah, that's the plan. Does that make any sense? No, it doesn't. If anything, the bully will just retaliate even more if that's what you're going to do. So by the same token, if your theory is, if your worldview is these big bad oil companies are driven by greed and have all sorts of power to charge basically whatever they want because Americans have to drive, then if you're concerned that they're charging too much right now, why would you support someone who says, my solution to this, or one of my solutions, is to take more of their money? That doesn't make any sense. Last point. I think some people, when they hear these sorts of arguments, come back and they say, oh, okay, you're right. It's not so much that the president's proposal would lead to lower gasoline prices. It's just that with the extra money he would raise, he could lower taxes, give special rebates to middle-class working families, things like that. Okay, if that's the argument, but then keep in mind, according to your own worldview, those tax rebates and whatever that you're going to get might come at the expense of even higher gasoline prices. Because again, the point is you're saying these oil companies want to make a certain target amount of profit. For some reason they raised that target in the last 3 years. I don't know why they did that, but for some reason lately they've decided they are greedier and they want to make more money, so they jacked up the prices because they can do whatever they want. And then the president is going to take some of that money and then use it for socially noble purposes. Okay, but again, according to your own view, the oil companies have the power to just recoup their losses. So keep that in mind, that whatever benefits you think might accrue from raising more tax revenue from these deep pockets over here might just come right out of your own pocket again, according to your own worldview, because they're just gonna raise prices in response. Okay. So in conclusion, I want to just say the president's proposal doesn't make any sense. Whether you think, as standard economists do, that prices are set in a globally competitive market, and that crude prices are determined by supply and demand, and individual companies, no matter how big, really can't set the world price of oil, that instead it's set by factors like consumption, unrest in the Middle East, people thinking there's going to be a supply disruption. If it's set by factors like that, then clearly coming along and raising taxes at one point in that distribution chain is going to raise prices for consumers at the end of that production line. Or, if you think, throw those supply and demand curves out the window, this is a special case of oil companies with a lot of power, and you think that they're just making some target amount of profit. Well, again, the president's proposal to take some of their money will lead them to raise prices even more. So no matter what your worldview is, the president's proposal to end tax breaks on oil companies will lead to higher gasoline prices. So if you're mad about high gasoline prices, there are different things you might consider, but ending tax breaks on big oil companies really isn't one of them. Alright everyone, that's my time for today. Thanks for watching this, another episode of Econ Moments with Bob Murphy. So long.